Welcome to the Canadian Cannabis Podcast. Welcome everybody joining us today. Pete Patterson, CEO of Valcon Medical. He's joining us from Denmark and he's Canadian. What a great opportunity. Pete, thank you for your time previously. We've exchanged some email and had a short telephone call, which is similar to some of the guests coming on. And then boom, here we are meeting for the first time virtually. I like to keep it raw. I like to go into exactly a little bit of what it is. I mean, the digital marketing platforms, the social media space for the cannabis industry, the cannabis community. LinkedIn particularly has been a big backdrop for a lot of maneuvers. Our initial introduction, which would be unfamiliar unless explaining to you, was coming as a student instructor role while I was completing post-secondary cannabis education in Canada, in Manitoba, coming out of Durham College, and we were presented with information on our top quality, the country's top quality extraction methods, and some of the genius minds behind the equipment going into that, and the importance in the quality assurance measures being put into those products that come out of those awesome machines. So with no further ado, Pete Patterson, please explain a little bit to us, a little bit about what it's been like, man, like where you're at, how did you get going in the industry? Yes, thank you.
Hey, no, appreciate being on here. Thank you. Yeah, so cannabis. Cannabis has been in my life for an extremely starting with my mother, who was a patient and a grower in Canada, ACMPR program back in starting 2001. So young age. After finishing the MBA, funny enough, I got back in really intentionally, but this is 2013, 2014. We started seeing the upcomings in the market and just regulation, all of that. Yeah, started with investing into and participating in a private equity fund that was investing into legal cannabis. That company was called Deventi. Working with that, and then a good buddy of mine, Joel Sherlock, we were working together, had the concept to, I'm not an engineer. I didn't even know what supercritical fluid extraction was at the time. With his encouragement, as Joel always is, and his vision, we worked to come up with the plan to establish an organization, and that was Vitalis Extraction Technology. Great engineers on board. One, James Seabrook, it was really the inventor of flagship technology when it came to Vitalis. Through that, I sold in 2019, really became a further investor into the space. I think there's probably 11 still within that portfolio. And awesome. Then one of them being Valcon Medical. And Valcon, as an organization that's focusing in space, the board of directors had called me up after I sold Vitalis. Young to retire, can you come out here and come and participate and work with the Valcon? The Valcon team had an incredible background when it came to pharmaceutical infrastructure, manufacturing, but when it came to cannabis, nobody had ever really touched the plant. Downloaded my cannabis knowledge with the team, and they've been crushing it since. So that's where we're at.
No kidding, right? So that the importance in that alone, when you touched on that, and I mean, it does come up in discussions. I read it in publications, whether it's online blogs or in my subscriptions that I get, print subscriptions, with regard to that. Making the right approaches and recommendations for corporations with that hands-on experience. But I mean, especially to be all the way down to Denmark from Canada, and then beyond that. So I mean, we're looking at that, what your description of your journey so far, and then putting not just having you there to be involved with Valcon from the hands-on experience that way, but now carrying that into the industry as it stands, the global industry. As I shared on my social media last night regarding my short tale with my introduction of you leaving your fingerprints right on the global cannabis industry. And that how does that play into now that relationship between Canada and Denmark, and let's say with the Canadian flower, our product, and the international market in terms of medical top quality medical extracts?
Well, when we take a look at the globe, it's a monstrous place, but from the global cannabis tiny ecosystem. Everybody seems to know everybody. It's a lots of entrepreneurs. Like, don't get me wrong, lots of new people, new groups, new everything starting up. But when you look at a group that's been in it since the early 2010, we run into a lot of the same people. Those that have built successful companies and then either sold or it may be, and gone on to multiple successful companies. Its ecosystem is played out. But as we take a look at the ecosystem, we look at the recreational markets and how these various markets have matured, right? And so we've been able to watch the Canadian market even from the early 2000s, right? From the compassionate grow. That's how my mother and how I was first introduced to cannabis was through and regulations, right? And then seeing how different countries are adopting and not countries are looking like, say, Germany, for example, right? And we're trying to take a look at this. In Germany, we have there's 3 cultivation licenses in Germany. 2 of them are held by Canadian. One's by a German company. Lots of IP that's heading over from Canada. If we take products, because in Germany they can't cultivate enough to be able to supply the demand, we've destroyed thousands and thousands of tons of flower in Canada, right? Almost grown too much. And Canada was originally supposed to be a very international market. The market hasn't grown as fast as I guess one had hoped that might be, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Canada is still probably one of the largest importers, if not the largest importer of flower into Germany, of products that are coming out of the Canadian market into Denmark, for example. Canada show up a little bit more like in the UK markets. So Canada is quite a bit, either through outsourcing of human capital and human resources into the different regions to be able to grow different industries or different markets, or right. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that continues to play out.
It must be thrilling. I mean, all around outstanding, definitely. And again, like I mentioned, your fingerprint in the global, that we're talking not just Denmark and Canada alone. So what in the distillate, as far as that regard, is there a particular product that as far as anything that you've done that's come back, like through the 3.5 years of legalization, for example, in Canada? Is there one particular product that you guys know is just like through the CO2 extraction, that's, what I mean, in the top percentiles as far as total, total cannabinoids or total THC potency in the end, as far as people go that way medically? Is there anything that stands out?
Is there a magic bullet? I don't think so. Spending so much over them, I was back in Canada, and back in Canada at the moment, actually, on vacation. Maybe here, I was at a dispensary over in Sydney, BC, Sydney, British Columbia, and I went into, I'm like, what's good? Like, what are people buying? And so the boys actually bought some beverages, and it was, if they were actually looking for organic stuff. They weren't looking for super high potency, but they would be terpene type flower, right? And interesting things to be able to see kind of how the Canadian market is evolving and what it's turning into, right? Look at the European markets. The European markets it's oils, right? That we saw very early days in the Canadian market. So it would be like a distillate or a full MCT oil, for example. That's what we see in the European markets, and some Canadian markets. In the U.S. market, we see those maturing into, you can get gummies, you can get topical You can get all sorts of different types of oils. And you can do a lot of extraction methodologies. I know CO2 really well. I see stuff in the US with DHO. We see stuff in the US with presses. So a lot more of the craft type stuff that's really coming up. And that's really wrong. We've made a really great business off of making CO2 extraction systems. Great spot in the market, especially for the medicinal side of things. But I think that we're going to start to be more representative of, say, the beer or the wine market, where we're going to have some. I think the craft players are really going to continue to dominate those markets because they can make some really cool stuff, really high quality, and focus on those high terpene profiles. Really, where I see a lot of people gravitating towards is now as the market matures, it's not going to be as much of the highest potency I can get as we saw in the alcohol market, right? It's moonshine started 98% alcohol or whatever it may be. It no longer is that. People are after a flavor profile you get or how quickly you can get high. But what does that high feel like, right? Some people is drinking gin because they get a different, say, drunk off of tequila, right? And where my blood type, my diet, my body size, I might like something than what you like, right? And I think that's going to be the magic of the cannabis space.
Awesome. So you're kind of leading it along. Very interesting. The terpene, especially the terpene, you know what I mean? When it comes down to the terpene extraction, terpenoids, cannabinoids. Oh,
still here.
Still there, Pete? Right on. Well, as long as I didn't lose you there, and as long as I don't lose my train of thought with that, because it's going on 420, so I got a number of things going through my mind. No, so I mean, overall, terpenoids, flavonoids, right? Cannabinoids, the number of each of those categories, the growing number medically and scientifically coming out. But you were mentioning, so when that comes into roles, number one thing you said, wines and spirits. So just keeping dialogue rolling along. Looking up at Valcon. So anyone that I've recommended and sharing the social media out and getting people drawing that attention, because interestingly, what I'm finding similarly is, so you got the collaborations, for example, in Canada that have happened with, say, Coors, right? Bedfellows, that the type of product where it actually, and obviously makes sense, getting down to the specialty, the brains behind those operations, right? And the collaborations coming from it, the quality that's going up in some of those brands' drinks, from flavor right to actual effect, like you mentioned it, but even not just THC potency or anything, but physical responsivity, like a quenching drink as opposed to a get you high drink. You know what I mean? But something enjoyable, and that brings up too. So in Manitoba, we've seen it. I've had guests on the show. Toba Grown was on. They have a product, Toba Rolls. We're seeing a lot more collaboration starting to happen as far as packaging goes, and the brands trying to alleviate within their provincial jurisdictions that type of issue. And I found last night on the website, looking a little further in with Valcon, is the white labeling process. So a term introduced to me in early 2021, very early onset, when I had kind of very, again, early exploration into what digital marketing was going to begin to look like in Canada with restrictions so tight, and also wrapping my mind around a number of other applying to the CTLS, of course, learning all these different avenues so that possibly you could try to get into. The idea eventually, as things kind of started to roll along, becoming involved with a provincial cannabis brand myself, in a board of director role as an advisor. I'd say advisor. They titled me expert, but I would never self-title that, man. Especially, I am Indigenous, but and I love cannabis, but definitely, an advisory role that's paid off well. Not personally, I mean for the people that we're trying to help, and everything's going to be coming together. But that white labeling concept came then, and I was like, it was very early. I looked at it, didn't understand it. And now I see it starting to happen with numerous brands. So I did want to touch upon that with you, especially looking at a small company like myself, for example, through COVID, after COVID, maintaining a bit of a digital presence and looking to be that type of mobile kind of brand building player, that white labeling concept, because it's either which way the establishment in the cannabis industry is prevalent, and I mean and reputable that way. So I mean the responsibility coming with it and carrying it forward. That's definitely something I plan to connect with you and maintain in touch following afterwards, just because I'm working with the amount of people that I've been able to at this point, and the open dialogue that I've had with people regarding that. So I think it'd be a great opportunity if you could educate us all a little bit about what white labeling actually is. How does Valcon do that? And what's the benefit for small brands, like in the cannabis industry to make a move like that?
Will help without having to set up that back end infrastructure, right? We've all seen how much space and how many groups wanted to be completely vertically integrated. So they were going to do everything all the way down through processing the plant and all the way down through packaging, branding, communicating that to the end market. And if you're trying to be everything across that value chain, it's very, very difficult to be exceptional in a single aspect of that. And what we're seeing is some of those groups have maybe mediocre products that are in the market. If you've got a great team that's like, you know what, we're a brand house. We know to the market, but I don't know how to make the stuff. I know what I want it to taste like. I know what I want it to be. You can, right? That's here on the West Coast of Canada, and chat with like Tyler, the CEO, and be like, okay, can you do it for us, right? And they'll price out, the manufacturer of that, and then now you've got a product, and then you can bring that to market. So that's really all white labeling is you can go through that entire process for you. They've already the economies of scale there. They've already learned all the lessons. They've made all the mistakes of just improperly processing cannabis. Cannabis is a very complex, right? And it is one of these things where you can have your 10,000 hours to try to become a professional, but 50, 60, 70, 80, 200, $300 a kilo, whatever it may be, processing is very expensive. That's what we saw, billions almost flushed, been some, let's call it irresponsible use of capital within the space, but and that learning within the space has been where those hours have been built up, have been able to figure out how to appropriately manufacture. So yeah, that's where I wouldn't actually start to manufacture my own t-shirts. Maybe I might be able to find a group that can manufacture those machines, right? And that's where I see the markets moving to, and that's what we set up over just looking at the mistakes that were made in Canada and saying, hey, look, vertical integration probably isn't the smartest move. And a lot of the my European counterparts were all kind of drinking the same Kool-Aid, right? Cultivators that are over in Europe, and even connecting with cultivators in Canada and saying, look, I need this type of these are the types of products that we're trying to make, and almost banding together to be able to come into the industry more united versus fragmented and competitive. Don't get me wrong, there's still but when we're a little bit more responsible with our capital, and responsible, of course, right? And we're more responsible with capital versus, I guess, maybe a less likely scenario, right? Specialization, that's where we really see, at least the cannabis industry within the highly specialization across that value chain, right? And I'm starting to see that groups are either selling off fragments of their business, or we're starting to see some consolidating fragments of business being moved over to where they can specialize in certain areas. Like when you take a look at Grey Goose, right? Is Grey Goose out there growing the wheat? I think they're potato based or wheat based. I don't know. That's really what are going to be focusing on brands. I think they're going to create a lot of value. Not saying the manufacturers aren't; they're going to make a lot, but specialize, do it right. If I'm a cultivator, does it. I've had an opportunity to invest because I'm an investor into the space. I've had an opportunity. I know nothing about it, and so it's an area, right? Just because I'm not that expert. We've had the opportunity at Valcon where we've thought, hey, and vertically integrate, and that the idea pops up for 3 seconds, and they're like, no, focus the cash, be like fiscally responsible with the capital that's coming, and so that we can provide not only like good return on investment, but a good pro working with, right? That's kind of what it comes down to, not putting shit into the market.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's pretty obvious that that's exactly the goal that you have with Valcon and your role with, I mean, like you said, they kind of plucked you right out of Canada to come right down to Denmark. And then as we see these industries kind of unfold and the layout, the play that could come into play with the international market at hand, they picked it obviously nail on the head. And that's what I was curious, since your recruitment to the Valcon position in Denmark, has it like have you broadened that? Is there a Canadian team now in helping you there? Are you still solo
All
representation?
Danish. Yeah. And I'm so hands off on the operations now. It's such an incredible team. Like, I loaded the cannabis component, but we have, like, I'd say 90% of the team's master gets a free education as far up as they want to go, right? So I'm dealing with like Masters of Science and PhDs, and it's such an incredible group to be able to work with. It was really just connections to the various cannabis resources that are available, and then a little bit of on the extraction side of things. Really, the role that I play nowadays is pointing the organization, mapping out and understanding how the markets are going to mature, and then where do we have tinctures. What products do we make next? What are consumers going to want? Consumers going to want the same as what Danish consumers are going to want, the same as Israeli consumers, the UK consumers, right? Like, all over the continent of Europe, it's quite dynamic. In the same instance, it's not dissimilar to what we saw on the Canadian model, where it came into the regulated market and started kind of dropping in their understanding of that. The professionals that have worked in, say, the larger horticultural spaces or agricultural really kind of took it to that next level, right? The business professionals that have and stuff like that versus the startup entrepreneur, right? To take a company from zero from 100 million to $1 billion and operate it appropriately. That's always the next consideration. That's been my role, is not really to Canadianize it by any means. It's to help the European team just understand cannabis, the dynamics of cannabis, what it truly means to the consumer. Because I'd say probably, I talked about 90% of my staff being master's degree. I'd say 90% of my staff there haven't actually touched cannabis.
No kidding,
our staff has worked in facilities that have made, cancer drugs and epilepsy drugs, to different drugs, like with the largest pharmaceutical companies in Europe. And so they just look at it as they're manufacturing. It's not really a novelty to them. And, when you go into the facility and there's hundreds of pounds in a single tote of weed, they're just like, okay, that's an input material. It's really right. Versus the first time I saw it, like, when we started this plant and testing out the systems, and I saw, a couple hundred pounds dropped off to get processed. I was flabbergasted. I was like, holy shit, this is a lot of weed. But very, very good at the same. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds wild. It obviously demonstrates a lot of trust, regardless, in your business relationship. From what you've explained right there, them seeking you out, and if that percentile is a reflection of that, exactly wanting the best. Obviously you're representing Canada very well there with those numbers in mind of what they expect from you, you know what I mean? And then you're, like you said, look at where Valcon is. So, I mean, you're obviously producing. It's a very beautiful thing. And I can
we're
only,
lucky.
yeah.
It's an interesting spot to be in the white label manufacturing groups that's EU GMP certified, right? How we're going to continue to process ourselves, or not process ourselves, how we're going to just, as a manufacturing company, step into more advanced manufacturing, right? So,
Right.
more products.
With like, even with that in mind, is it like, obviously R&D plays, I mean, a massive role regardless of which avenue in the industry someone is exploring, you know what I mean, or market even that way. But as far as that goes for you with the R&D, are we looking, is Canada or any industry, the medical cannabis industry, expecting anything totally advanced coming at all from you know what I mean, as far as the next level manufacturing or processing equipment and technology goes for some of those? Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to start to see some, like, we'll continue to see, like, even on the supercritical side of things, like with working with supercritical CO2, or for like subcritical and supercritical, like carbon dioxide has been used as right. The influx of capital into the cannabis space allowed for investment into that technology, and so I think what we continue to see is, the cannabis be endlessly creative, maybe fueled a little bit by cannabis itself, but it is where they, I think it's taking a look at a lot of the existing technologies in place today. That's happening. Hold on, there's some invention that's happening, but there's a lot of innovation, right? So there might be some wild creative idea that's never been utilized before, and sure, that I'm seeing a lot of innovation where we see concepts or processes or whatever it may be, inhalation methodologies, or different product ideas, or different ways to, those are being innovated for the cannabis space, right? See, and that's, in the European market, I continue to look back at the North America. What can I take from this market, and what needs to be, what can be innovated, or what we can say license some of that IP as a manufacturer, or partner with a brand market. So that's a lot of our discussions nowadays, is saying, do I make it or do I buy it? Do I ourselves? Do we send our PhDs on it, or do we, we just signed a licensing agreement with group that's on the New York Stock Exchange. Head office is in Kelowna. Great guy, and they've got a really cool technology, and it made sense for us to license out and make it ourselves. So it is this fine line to say, okay, what path do you prefer? The path of licensing when we can, because the North American market is so far European market, and the next challenge that we run into on the European side, and it was what we saw on the Canadian side, it's just regulation, right?
Right.
I want to make cool products like a shatter. I can't sell that in Europe. There's no pathway. I can hear the rooster. There's no for those types of products in the European market yet, right? We're looking at a highly regulated, and imagine a physician saying, hey, go dab this half gram. Like,
yeah,
doctors in Germany have no idea even what that is, let alone to be able to prescribe. So those are the complications that we run to on that side, is where that innovation leap runs into years, and then finding those pathways to market.
It wraps it up beautifully, because really what you're demonstrating all around, and couldn't be the better platform, the Canadian Cannabis Podcast, is adaptability, man. Like, in that innovation and the invention and the terminology there, and the explaining that specifically, that's what I'm, you know what I mean? The adaptability, your ability that way too, to even to see that. And I've said it before on other episodes, like, not to reinvent the wheel entirely, you know what I mean? Because some of that legacy to legal transition, but I mean, obviously, like, also, as far as I've dissected that, the adaptability to quality assurance, and that top
it's a
measure.
level of adaptability, right? As markets evolve and change, how can you adapt? Yeah.
And they picked right when they said, let's get a Canadian up here to manage Canadian flower.
Hopefully. I so. You know what? There's probably, I've been in the space for a long time. Great people that can do it. I think Europe presents a great opportunity. Presents great opportunity to continue in the cannabis space. There's some, even in Canada, we saw this new now being allowed on shelves, right? So sold through grocery stores and stuff. And we're going to start to see that come through. I see the industry go through its ups and its downs. That's completely normal, but that ahead of us all across the globe as we continue to work across the cannabis space.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we're reaching our time. Pete, I'm going to start to wrap up a little bit. I actually am off to work tonight. I'm slinging legal herb down at Pot Life Cannabis shop tonight. And again, you brought up a good point, the regulations. Good thing in Manitoba and Canada, 2019, 2020, regulations changed. Ancillary company, where I offer virtual services. What I have left while stock remains, my apparel and other items available on shelves at Pot Life Cannabis and Vape Shop. So an important maneuver for a small company like myself, taking that next collaboration, looking at it at a small scale, and also having a guest of your nature, man. You know what I mean? You're a beast yourself that way out in the global cannabis industry, and looking at those collaborations and partnerships and where they can actually build to and go with all of that hard work. So for myself, much love, for Respect My Region. You as a guest, all of the guests of the Canadian Cannabis Podcast, all my family and friends, and great support over the while. Pete, I'm going to leave you the final words, man, if you can wrap us up, and appreciate your time. Great to have you on as a guest.
Thank you kindly. I'm representing us globally, and just keep it up and keep supporting. We're all trying to do in the cannabis space. So thank you all for the trust, the patience out there.
Peace.